Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd start the big yellow bus and begin his route through the military housing on base. The kids loved him, always had a joke, always patient, always made sure they got to school safely. To them, he was just Mr. Charlie, the friendly bus driver who'd been doing this job for 15 years. But when 8-year-old Tommy Miller asked about the faded photo taped to his dashboard, a picture of a helicopter in a jungle clearing, everything changed. Because Mr. Charlie wasn't just a bus driver, he was a Vietnam helicopter pilot who'd spent 2 years flying into hell to bring America's sons home. Welcome to Everyday Legends. Before we continue this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Because sometimes the greatest heroes drive school buses and carry our most precious cargo. Charlie Rodriguez was 71 years old and had been driving school bus 47 at Fort Liberty for 15 years. Every weekday morning at 6:45 a.m., he'd arrive at the depot, do his pre-trip inspection, and begin the route that would take him through base housing to pick up military children for school. The kids adored him. Charlie always had a warm smile, a dad joke ready, and infinite patience for the chaos that comes with transporting 30 energetic children twice a day. He knew every kid's name, remembered their birthdays, and always had a tissue or a Band-Aid ready when needed. "Morning, sunshine," he'd call to shy little Emma Watson as she climbed aboard. "Ready for that math test today, champ?" he'd ask Marcus, the third grader who always sat in the front seat. To the parents dropping their children off, Charlie was a godsend, reliable, caring, and utterly trustworthy with their most precious cargo. To the kids, he was Mr. Charlie, the bus driver who made their daily commute an adventure, but Charlie Rodriguez carried secrets that would have stunned every parent on the base. In 1969, at age 19, Charlie had been Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez, pilot of a UH-1 Huey helicopter with the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam. For 2 years, he'd flown some of the most dangerous missions of the war: medical evacuations, supply runs to isolated firebase, and the deadliest assignment of all, combat search and rescue. Charlie had flown into hell to bring America's sons home. Now, 5 decades later, he spent his days making sure other people's children got to school safely. It seemed like a perfect circle, from rescuing soldiers to protecting kids. But Charlie never talked about the connection. To him, his past was a closed book that belonged to a different lifetime. The interior of Bus 47 was decorated with Charlie's personal touches, colorful seat cushions to make the ride more comfortable, a small first aid kit mounted near the driver's seat. And on the dashboard, partially hidden behind his clipboard, was a small, faded photograph that most passengers never noticed. The photo showed a olive-drab helicopter sitting in a jungle clearing, rotors still turning, with several soldiers around it. One of them, barely visible in flight gear and helmet, was a young man who looked nothing like the gentle bus driver the children knew. 8-year-old Tommy Miller was different from the other kids. Son of Staff Sergeant James Miller, Tommy had inherited his father's attention to detail and curiosity about military history. While other kids chatted or played games during the bus ride, Tommy often found himself studying the cab of the bus, fascinated by the various switches, mirrors, and equipment. It was on a Tuesday morning in October that Tommy's curiosity finally got the better of him. "Mr. Charlie," Tommy said from his usual seat directly behind the driver. "What's that picture?" Charlie glanced in the rearview mirror. "What picture, buddy?" "The one on your dashboard with the helicopter." Charlie's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. In 15 years of driving, no child had ever asked about that photograph. He'd almost forgotten it was there. "Oh, that," Charlie said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just an old picture. Nothing important." But Tommy was persistent. "Were you in the Army?" "My dad says all the best helicopter pilots were in the Army." Charlie smiled despite himself. "Your dad's a smart man." "So were you?" "A helicopter pilot." Charlie pulled up to the next stop and opened the door for 3 more children. The momentary distraction gave him time to think. How much should he say? How much could an 8-year-old understand? "A long time ago," Charlie said finally. "Before you were born, before your parents were born." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Really? What kind of helicopter?" "A Huey. They called it a Huey." "Like in the movies?" Charlie winced slightly. The movies never got it right. "Something like that." For the rest of the ride to school, Tommy peppered Charlie with questions. Where did he fly? What was it like? Did he ever get shot at? Charlie answered as simply as possible, deflecting the harder questions with jokes or by redirecting Tommy's attention to something outside the window. But when they reached the school and Tommy hopped off the bus, he turned back and said something that hit Charlie like a punch to the chest. "Mr. Charlie, I bet you were a hero." That afternoon, on the ride home, Tommy brought his friend Marcus into the conversation. "Marcus, guess what? Mr. Charlie used to be a helicopter pilot in the war." Marcus, a fourth grader and the son of a Marine sergeant, was immediately interested. "Really? Which war?" "Vietnam," Tommy said proudly, as if he'd discovered a treasure. Charlie caught Marcus studying him in the rearview mirror with new interest. Word was spreading, he realized. By tomorrow, every kid on the bus would know. That evening, Charlie sat in his small apartment, staring at a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were his military records, photographs, and medals from Vietnam. He'd put them away decades ago when the nightmares were still frequent and the memories too raw. But Tommy's innocent questions had stirred something. Maybe it was time to remember. Maybe some stories deserved to be told. The next morning, Tommy was waiting at his stop with barely contained excitement. "Mr. Charlie, I asked my dad about Vietnam helicopters and he showed me pictures on his computer. Was yours really like that?" Charlie looked at Tommy's eager face in the mirror and made a decision. "Tell you what, buddy, if you can keep it between us for now, I'll tell you a little bit about it. But this stays on the bus, okay? Some stories are just for us." Tommy nodded solemnly. "I promise." As Charlie navigated the morning route, he began to share small pieces of his story. Nothing graphic, nothing that would frighten a child, but real memories of flying in Vietnam. He told Tommy about the distinctive sound of Huey rotor blades, whop, 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 that could be heard from miles away. He described the feeling of lifting off from a firebase at dawn, watching the jungle spread out below like a green carpet. "Were you scared?" Tommy asked. Charlie was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but we had a job to do. Other soldiers were counting on us." "What kind of job?" "We brought supplies to soldiers who couldn't get them any other way. Food, ammunition, medicine. And sometimes—" Charlie paused. "Sometimes we brought soldiers home when they were hurt." Tommy was fascinated. "You were like an ambulance in the sky." Charlie smiled. "I never thought of it that way, but yeah, something like that." Over the following weeks, Charlie found himself sharing more stories with Tommy during their morning and afternoon rides. He talked about his crew chief, Sergeant Williams, who could spot a landing zone from impossible distances. About his door gunner, Specialist Torres, who had nerves of steel and could lay down covering fire while they extracted wounded soldiers. He told Tommy about flying through monsoon rains so thick you couldn't see 50 feet ahead, navigating by instruments and instinct. About landing in tiny clearings barely big enough for the helicopter while enemy fire crackled through the trees around them. But always, Charlie kept the stories appropriate for a child. He focused on the technical aspects of flying, the camaraderie with his crew, the satisfaction of completing difficult missions, the darker aspects, the casualties, the friends lost, the close calls that still woke him up at night. Those stayed locked away. Tommy soaked up every word. He started bringing a small notebook to write down details he didn't want to forget. He drew pictures of helicopters in his spare time. And gradually, other kids on the bus began to listen in. "Mr. Charlie," asked Emma Watson one day, "did you ever meet any famous people?" Charlie chuckled. "I met some very brave people. That made them famous to me." "Like who?" pressed Marcus. "Well, there was this young medic named Doc Peterson. Couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He rode with us on medevac missions, and I never saw him hesitate, no matter how dangerous the landing zone was. If there were wounded soldiers, Doc Peterson was going in." "What happened to him?" Tommy asked. Charlie's expression grew distant. "Doc Peterson saved a lot of lives, more than I could count." The children didn't notice that Charlie hadn't really answered the question. As word spread among the kids, it inevitably reached their parents. Staff Sergeant Miller was the first to approach Charlie after school one day. "Mr. Rodriguez, Tommy's been talking about your helicopter stories. I hope he's not bothering you with questions." Charlie shook his head. "Not at all. He's a good kid. Reminds me of myself at that age. Curious about everything." "He said you flew medevac missions in Vietnam. That true?" Charlie nodded. Among other things, Miller studied Charlie with new respect. "I deployed to Afghanistan twice. Different war, but I know what it means to bring soldiers home. Thank you for your service." "Thank you for yours," Charlie replied. Word continued to spread among the military families. Parents who had barely noticed the bus driver began to see him differently. Some approached him with their own questions, sharing their own service stories, creating connections across generations of military experience. But it was Dr. Sarah Chen, the base pediatrician, who asked the question that changed everything. Dr. Chen's daughter Lucy rode Charlie's bus, and she'd been fascinated by his Vietnam stories. When Dr. Chen heard about Charlie's background, she had an idea. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said one afternoon as Charlie finished his route, "would you consider speaking to our Veterans Day assembly at the school?" Charlie's face went pale. "Oh, I'm not much of a public speaker." "You don't have to give a formal speech. Maybe just talk to the kids about service, about what it means to help others. They already know and trust you." Charlie shook his head. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm just a bus driver now. That other life, it's in the past." But Dr. Chen wasn't easily deterred. "Mr. Rodriguez, these children look up to you. You're already teaching them about service every day, making sure they're safe, being patient with them, caring about their well-being. That's what Veterans Day is really about." That evening, Charlie sat in his apartment thinking about Dr. Chen's words. He pulled out the old box again and looked through photographs he hadn't seen in years, pictures of his crew, his helicopter, fire base he'd visited dozens of times. And then he found a letter, yellow with age, written in careful handwriting. It was from the mother of Specialist Danny Crawford, a 19-year-old soldier Charlie had evacuated from a hot landing zone in 1970. "Dear Chief Rodriguez," the letter began, "I wanted to thank you for bringing my son home. Danny told me how you and your crew risked everything to get him and the others out of that terrible place. Because of you, my boy lived to come home, to marry his girlfriend, to give me grandchildren. You gave me back my son's life. You gave me everything." Charlie wiped his eyes and made a decision. The next morning, he told Tommy about the Veterans Day invitation. "Mr. Charlie, that's so cool. You have to do it." "I don't know, buddy. Talking to a whole auditorium of kids is different from our conversations on the bus." Tommy thought for a moment. "But Mr. Charlie, you talk to us every day about being safe and helping each other. That's what you did in the war, too, right? Keeping people safe and helping them?" Charlie looked at Tommy in the rearview mirror and saw the earnest face of a child who believed his bus driver was a hero. Maybe Tommy was right. Maybe it was the same job, just in a different setting. "You know what, Tommy? Maybe I will." The Veterans Day assembly was held in the school gymnasium, packed with students, parents, and base personnel. Charlie sat on the stage feeling more nervous than he had flying into enemy fire. When Dr. Chen introduced him, the applause was warm and sustained. Charlie stood up, looked out at the sea of faces, including Tommy in the front row, giving him an encouraging thumbs up, and began to speak. "Good morning. Most of you know me as Mr. Charlie, your bus driver. But Dr. Chen asked me to tell you about another job I had, a long time ago when I was a young man." Charlie's voice was steady but quiet, forcing the audience to lean in and listen. "I was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. My job was to fly into places where soldiers needed help, bringing them supplies or medicine or sometimes just bringing them home." He paused, looking at the children in the front rows. You might think that was very different from driving a school bus, but actually, it was the same job. My job then, and my job now, is to make sure people get where they need to go safely. Charlie talked for 10 minutes about service, about caring for others, about the importance of doing your job well, whether anyone is watching or not. He kept it simple, appropriate, focusing on values rather than combat details. Every day when I drive your bus, I remember my crew from Vietnam. Sergeant Williams, who always had my back. Specialist Torres, who would do anything to protect the soldiers we were trying to help. They taught me that the most important thing isn't being brave or being strong. It's being there for the people who are counting on you. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. But what moved Charlie most was seeing Tommy wipe tears from his eyes and hearing him whisper to the girl next to him, "That's my bus driver." After the assembly, Charlie was surrounded by students, parents, and faculty. Some thanked him for his service, others shared their own military stories. But the conversation that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Principal Hayes, a stern woman in her 50s, approached Charlie with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you, not just for your service in Vietnam, but for what you do here every day. My own father was a Vietnam veteran. He never talked about his service, and he struggled with demons from the war. I wish he could have found the peace and purpose you found." Charlie nodded, understanding more than she knew. The war changed all of us. Some found ways to heal, others didn't. I was lucky. "How did you find your way to healing?" Charlie looked across the gym at the clusters of children still chatting excitedly about the assembly. "I found a new mission, taking care of kids, making sure they're safe, being someone they can count on. It turns out that driving a school bus uses a lot of the same skills as flying a medevac helicopter. You have to stay calm under pressure, you have to put other people's safety first, and you have to show up every day no matter how you feel." Principal Hayes smiled. "I never thought of it that way. The job is different, but the purpose is the same. Bringing people home safe." In the weeks following the Veterans Day assembly, Charlie noticed changes in how people treated him. Parents waved more enthusiastically when he picked up their children. Base personnel nodded with obvious respect when they saw his bus. And the children looked at him with a mixture of awe and affection that both warmed and humbled him. But the most significant change was in Charlie himself. For the first time in decades, he felt proud of his service instead of haunted by it. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they became less frequent. The memories of friends lost in Vietnam didn't disappear, but they were balanced now by memories of children safely delivered to school every day. Tommy remained his most faithful chronicler, still bringing his notebook and asking questions about flying, about Vietnam, about what it meant to serve. And Charlie continued to answer, finding that sharing his stories, carefully, appropriately, helped both of them understand the connections between past and present. One morning, as they approached the school, Tommy asked a question that surprised Charlie. "Mr. Charlie, do you think I could be a helicopter pilot someday?" Charlie looked at Tommy in the mirror, this bright, curious boy who had somehow unlocked memories Charlie thought he'd buried forever. "I think you could be anything you want to be, buddy, but whatever you choose to do, remember the most important thing." "What's that?" "It's not about flying helicopters or driving buses or wearing uniforms. It's about taking care of the people who are counting on you. That's what service really means." Tommy nodded solemnly, writing in his notebook. Charlie continued driving, carrying his precious cargo toward school, toward their futures, toward whatever dreams they would choose to pursue. And for the first time in 50 years, he felt that his two lives, the young pilot who had flown through hell to bring soldiers home, and the older man who drove children safely to school, weren't separate chapters, but part of the same story. A story about service, about protecting others, about finding purpose in taking care of the people who matter most. As Charlie often told the children when they thanked him for the ride, "Just doing my job, kids. Just making sure everyone gets home safe. Some missions never really end. They just find new flight paths." Charlie Rodriguez, Vietnam helicopter pilot, school bus driver, guardian angel on wheels. He proved that heroes don't always wear flight suits. Sometimes they wear bus driver uniforms and carry children's laughter instead of wounded soldiers. But the mission remains the same, bringing precious cargo home safe, one trip at a time. So tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone whose humble job hid an extraordinary past? someone who found new ways to serve after their military career ended. Share their story, because here at Everyday Legends we believe that service never really ends. It just finds new forms. If this story touched you, subscribe and share. Because people like Charlie Rodriguez are everywhere, quietly serving, protecting our most precious cargo, and teaching the next generation what it really means to be a hero. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the most important flights are the ones that take our children safely to school every morning.